After months and months of asking, Cadillac has finally sent me their all-new flagship. This is the new 2021 Cadillac Escalade. If you're looking for the biggest, baddest, and one of the most expensive three-row vehicles in North America, look no further than the Cadillac Escalade, especially in the long wheelbase version, which is over 220 inches long. This is also the most expensive Cadillac at the moment, starting at $76,195, and if you get carried away with options, it will easily get up into the 6 digits. Cadillac's Escalade has always been about big, bold styling, and that certainly continues for 2021. Previous generations of the Escalade were rightly criticized for having an interior that was a little bit too low rent and ride quality that wasn't befitting a 6-figure price tag like we see on this model right here. But both of those things have been completely fixed for 2021. But as you'd expect, again, the bold styling continues. This definitely looks like a Cadillac and looks like an Escalade. We have this big, hungry grille, but it's shaped a little bit differently. It's shaped a little bit more like the rest of Cadillac's lineup. We have slimmer LED headlights. These are full LEDs, and then these absolutely massive accent lights and turn signal lights down below. Moving around to the side, the big and boxy proportions continue. This hood's really long because this was designed not just to accommodate the 6.2-liter V8, but also inline 6 engines, which are now available for 2021. Then there's the sheer size of the Escalade. 211 inches is the shortest Escalade. That is about 5 inches longer than a Lincoln Navigator and decently longer than any of the European options out there. And then there's the long wheelbase version if this simply isn't big enough for you. That one comes in at 226.9 inches long. That means that depending on the version of the Escalade you're looking at, this would either be half a foot or nearly 2 feet longer than any of the direct competition from Europe, or something like the Toyota Sequoia or the Nissan Armada or Infiniti QX80. The extra length wasn't added just to make this look more imposing, although it certainly does compared to some of those other options. It was added to give this class-leading legroom and class-leading cargo room. You'll definitely notice that on the inside, and if you get the long wheelbase version, you'll really notice it even more. Because unlike the Lincoln Navigator, and one key difference between this and the Navigator is that when you get the stretched version, we actually get a little bit more third-row room. In the Lincoln, when they give it the stretch, all of that goes to cargo area. In this, it's a little bit more balanced. Some goes to the cargo area and some goes to the third row. As you might expect in a luxury vehicle, the Escalade has an available adaptive air suspension, but this is a little bit different than most of the luxury air suspensions out there. In this vehicle, the airbags simply provide the vehicle's lift, so it controls the ride height. You can lower the vehicle down to make it easier to access. It will also do that automatically at higher speeds to improve aerodynamics, and then you can raise the vehicle up if you want more ground clearance to clear an obstacle. But the damping in this system is not provided by the airbags. That's actually provided by a MagneRide system, which is a ferromagnetic fluid inside a damper, and it can adjust whether it wants that fluid to be really viscous or really loose. The result is that the Escalade can not only control damping like we find in a lot of adaptive suspension systems out there, it can also adjust effectively the spring rate of the vehicle and the ride height at the same time. Now this is basically the same system that we find available in some of GM's other full-size SUVs. Hopefully this will make its way into some of their pickup trucks later in the future. The first thing you'll notice about the rear of the Cadillac are these absolutely enormous tail lamps. They have an animation to the lighting effect there. As you can see, when you lock and unlock the vehicle, it strobes upwards. We have amber turn signals on the outside, and Cadillac very proudly says that these are 3 feet tall, and I have no reason to doubt them. These are truly enormous tail lamp modules. When I first heard that they were going to be 3 feet tall, I thought maybe they would be a little bit too big, but I have to say it fits the style of the vehicle, and I'm really glad that they gave us amber turn signals. Another really interesting touch is from the side. These tail lamp modules look like they have ribs of plastic that go down to give it more of a 3D appearance. Other than that, this looks very much like you'd expect an SUV to look. We have a rear hatch glass that opens separately, which is a really lovely touch. This is something that's disappearing on a wide variety of SUVs and crossovers. Still have one here. And then if I latch that, we press the Cadillac logo to open the hatch. The one area where enthusiasts are likely to find fault with the Escalade is that we do not find Cadillac's Blackwing twin-turbo V8 engine under this hood. The rumor mill says that Cadillac had to make a choice, and either they could have used the twin-turbo V8 or they could have given this entire platform of SUVs the fully independent rear suspension, the trick airbags, etc. that we find in this model. I have to say this was probably the right choice if that truly was the calculus, but I would really have loved to have seen that twin-turbo V8 engine under this hood. This standard 6.2-liter V8 produces 420 horsepower and 460 pound-feet of torque, which is certainly a healthy amount of power, but it's just not going to be as fast as those twin-turbo V8 Germans. If you'd like to save money on your annual fuel costs, definitely something that's important for people that are using these for executive transport, there's also going to be a 3-liter turbo diesel inline-6 engine. It's the same price as the 6.2-liter V8. It'll produce 277 horsepower, which is definitely a drop from this, but it produces the same 460 pound-feet of torque. Both engines are mated to a 10-speed automatic transmission and your choice of rear-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive. The most efficient version is going to be the 2-wheel drive diesel at 23 miles per gallon. The least efficient one is obviously going to be the model with 4-wheel drive and the V8. This particular model is EPA rated for 16 mpg. The diesel corollary would be rated at 22, and that would result in about a $900 a year savings at current fuel prices, according to the EPA, and 15,000 miles a year. Thanks to the healthy torque figures and the 10-speed automatic transmission, the towing figures in the Escalade will handily beat the German options. Oddly enough, the 6.2-liter V8 engine will give you the highest and the lowest towing ability in the Escalade. It'll peak in the short wheelbase version with the 6.2-liter V8 engine and rear-wheel drive at 8,200 pounds, and will bottom out if you get the long wheelbase 4-wheel drive 6.2-liter V8 model. That will go down to $7,200 if you don't get the towing package. If you're interested in diesel towing, the diesel slots somewhere between those two numbers, and will of course vary based on the trims and the options that you select. I've only been able to get my hands on this Escalade for 48 hours, so I haven't had too much time to spend in the driver's seat other than Super Cruise testing, but I have to say I found the seat very comfortable. This is a new seat designed for Cadillac. It has a massage functionality that is pretty similar to a lot of the upper-end German massages there. It really has a good kneading function on the seat back. It's pretty comparable to what we see in Mercedes and Volvo seats. It also has 4-way adjustable lumbar support, and it will let you adjust the shape of the rear seat cushion as well. But oddly missing on these front seats is any kind of thigh cushion extension. That did surprise me just a little bit. We have inflatable bolsters, but no thigh cushion extension. We have a memory-linked powered tilt telescopic steering column with a 2-position memory over there on the driver's door, but no seat memory for the passenger. On the other hand, the passenger seat has the exact same range of motion as the driver's seat, including the available massage functionality. Depending on the exact trims that you're comparing one generation to another, the one dimension that did shrink with this Escalade is headroom. If I sit back in this second row seat, it's upright in its most upright position there, I have about half an inch of headroom left. Now this does have a large panoramic moonroof, which obviously will cut down on second row headroom a little bit. All versions of the Escalade are going to be 7-passenger SUVs. Second row seats do slide forward and backwards so you can apportion space a little bit more equitably, but you're never going to get a bench in the middle. Getting into the third row is pretty easy. The second row seats have sort of a fold and tumble design that's a pretty classic SUV seat design, rather than collapsing forwards towards the front seat. It's worth noting that obviously you couldn't leave a child seat latched into place if you want to move it in that manner, but because the Escalade is so wide and we just have captain's chairs on the outside, it's definitely possible to walk right here through the middle and get into the third row. Diving through the middle is probably going to be the preferred method of getting into the third row for kids because the second row seats are pretty heavy and it does require a little bit of effort to actually latch that second row seat back into place, but you're rewarded with an enormous amount of legroom. By default, this seat did not latch into its furthest rearward position, but that's where it is now, and as you can see, I have about an inch of legroom left. And the seat bottom cushion is a little bit higher off the ground than it was before, so I have a little bit more thigh support. Of course, this is still a 3-passenger third row, so accommodations are going to be a little bit tight if adults are back here, but I have a generous amount of headroom. Leaning my head all the way back to this headrest, I have about an inch and a half left. That's made possible because Cadillac gave the ceiling a really dishy format right here, so it dives down really quite drastically behind the rear headrests down to that opening back there. The center seat belt does come out of the ceiling, which is not my preference, but we do have air vents up here. The 3 rear passengers get to share 2 cup holders, one on each side. There's also a small area for knickknacks, a very tiny padded armrest, and then USB charge ports on either side. A surprisingly premium touch back here is that this enormous pillar, which is behind the second row seats, it's identical on both sides of the vehicle, is completely covered in the same faux suede fabric that we find the ceiling covered in all the way to the rear, although the very last post in the vehicle is hard plastic. A common problem with full-size SUVs is that they don't always have greater cargo carrying ability than many large crossovers. For instance, the previous generation short wheelbase Escalade wasn't that far off the Cadillac XT6 in terms of cargo capacity, but this generation is definitely different. We also have some really nice practical touches, like a glass that opens separately from the hatch. We simply press this Cadillac logo to open the hatch itself. Behind here we find 25.5 cubic feet of cargo capacity. Now that is not that much ahead of the XT6 if I'm honest, but that's where the long wheelbase version comes in, because it will give you 42.9 cubic feet of storage space behind the third row seats, and the third row seats have more room than before. The short wheelbase Escalade is notably longer than the last generation model, and a lot of that stretch happens right back here in the cargo area, but not all of it. Some of it is shared, of course, with the seating area, and that's why we have really class-leading seating room there as well. You'll notice that I can fit 22-inch roller bags like this back here, and you could line up about 5 of them back here. So even though this is a 7-passenger vehicle, it would be a little tight for 7 people's luggage to fit back here, but obviously, again, that's where the long wheelbase model comes in. Under the load floor, we have a little bit of additional storage space, but not too much, and there is a spare tire. It's tucked up underneath the vehicle. The third row seats power fold, and it's a surprisingly fast mechanism, not just for lowering the seats down, but also for raising the seats up. So if you didn't like power folding seats because they were too slow, that's being played back in real time. In addition to power folding the third row seats, you can also power fold, but not power unfold the second row seats, and then a second click of the button will cause them to tumble forward. My one complaint about this cargo area is not actually the cargo area itself, but this hatch. As you can see, it is a little on the low side. I actually have to duck up a little bit because if I stand upright, my head is touching the ceiling right there. I'm only 6 feet tall. Clearly there are taller people than I am out there, and they will all have a problem with the height of this hatch. It is height adjustable inside, but this is at its maximum height. So it will get lower if, for instance, you're in a driveway or in a garage that has a really low overhang, low clearance. You'll be able to adjust that, but this is as tall as it gets. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that I am in what is at the moment the most expensive version of the Escalade. We have a large panoramic moonroof right over the driver and front passengers' heads, and this vehicle does have the optional 36-speaker audio system, which definitely sounds excellent, and it has speakers all over the cabin, including these interesting speakers above the second row and first row passengers' heads, which honestly remind me an awful lot of communicators in the classic Star Trek series. Commander Spock, I think we have found a car interior made entirely of speakers.
Fascinating.
For extra measure, Cadillac put speakers in the two-way adjustable headrests in the front seats. We also have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger. And you notice that those little perforations in the seat back are reminiscent of the Cadillac logo. So if we zoom in on them again, you'll see that they have little diamond shapes, right like that Cadillac logo that's on the seat back. The seat back and bottom cushion are not terribly aggressively bolstered, but the ones on the seat back cushion are adjustable in this particular model. The seats are massaging, heated, and ventilated in this trim. Moving over to the front door panels, you'll obviously notice the large amount of wood that we're going to take a look at in a bit, but if you look closer, you'll notice that a large portion of this door is covered in fabric. The sections that you see there, it looks like someone has left kind of a little dirty mark there on the side of the door. That's all fabric. Now we do have some plastics lower on the door, right around that bottle holder, that's a hard plastic, and then we have that speaker grill at the bottom, and then a leather armrest right there. A lot of stitched goods going on the door on the upper section, but the fabric really gives this an interesting, modern, and luxurious look. The wood trim is extensive in this interior. There are a number of different wood options to choose from, but one thing that I found odd, wood is standard, but leather is actually optional. The base upholstery in the Escalade is going to be imitation leather. The front passenger seats don't have the memory function that we have on the driver's seat, but you can see that the controls there are the same for the seat heating and ventilation. Moving over to the dashboard, again, more of that stitched material on top. Fabric sections down there at the bottom of the dash that really dresses things up, gives it a much more premium feel than we found in the previous generation. And I'm really impressed by the quality and just the color and texture of this wood. It's highly lacquered. If you're not a fan of that, then obviously you're not going to be a fan of this wood trim, but I have to say I've never minded really lacquered wood either. Moving over to the dashboard, we have absolutely enormous screens in here. We're obviously going to take a look at them separately here. According to Cadillac, the 3 screens that make up the driver's pod here are a total of 38 inches of curved organic LED display. The one over here on the infotainment side, this is the largest. It is technically over 16 inches. That's measured diagonally, so stretching from just above that home button all the way down there to that LTE signal. But as you can see, it also is pretty aggressively curved. So if I move over to some of the native displays, perhaps the map display might actually show that off a little bit better. You can see how aggressively curved that display is over there on that side. It really is an extraordinarily cool look. Now, if I go back to Apple CarPlay, you'll notice that CarPlay only uses a small portion of that display. That's just because of the orientation of displays allowed for Cadillac. They could have used a slightly longer format, but it wouldn't really have given you any more screen real estate for CarPlay or Android Auto. In an interesting touch, this isn't the only screen that can mirror your smartphone. If you have an Android phone, you can screen mirror on the rear entertainment system as well. The icons are probably familiar to you if you've seen a recent Cadillac system before, but the software is definitely a little bit different. We have the same basic features here like trailering, integrated apps, Alexa, Spotify. You can control the ambient lighting in the vehicle just as you'd expect in a modern luxury vehicle. You can link to drive modes. There's a demo mode. As we see in some other luxury vehicles, there's also a color wheel mode, so that way it will continually vary through there. You can adjust the brightness there, and you can also scroll through some of the other available colors in the system. Going back to the home screen gives us easier access to some of the features, also the parking assistance features, the autonomous parking feature available in the vehicle as well. And as you'd expect out of a luxury vehicle, there are a variety of different information screens that you can scroll through. Because these displays are all OLEDs, they don't have the same kind of glare problem that you find in a traditional LCD, so they're definitely more readable in regular daylight than we see a lot of other systems that have very similar hoodless profiles. Below that, we have the controls for the tri-zone automatic climate control. You can sync all the zones together with that little button right there. We also have a large air vent just above that. That's primarily for the driver. Below that, we have a joystick-style shifter that we've seen in other Cadillacs for a while. This is the only thing about this interior that I'm not the biggest fan of. I've just never cared for the way this shifter behaves or looks. If you want to use the paddles on the back of the steering wheel, you have to engage the low mode there. So if I simply pull it back into drive, the paddles on the back of the steering wheel don't do anything. Toggle it once more to low. And then of course park is that button on top. Behind the shifter, we have some additional buttons. That's where we find the lane keeping button, auto start stop button, and then the auto brake hold button. Continuing down from there, we find the same sort of rotary style infotainment controller that we've seen in other Cadillac models, home button, back button, etc. I personally find it easier just to touch the screen. This is the only place that you'll find a volume control other than the steering wheel. Next to that, we have two very large cup holders, and you can see another enormous expanse of wood. There are two USB ports up there, a storage cubby, two very large cup holders, a place where you can stash your phone. There's a Qi wireless charging mat in there. So you can see it's a little bit tight for some of those larger smartphones. Between the front seats, we have this large and softly padded center armrest. This opens to reveal an optional air-conditioned or refrigerated cooler right there. There's a button to change how cold you want it to be. And then we have two more USB inputs. I love the fact that Cadillac lets you choose which USB inputs you want. Some systems just have one that will work with CarPlay. This, all four of them will work with the infotainment system. You just plug into whichever one you want and the system will operate. You also don't have to plug in at all because this system supports wireless CarPlay. Underneath the center console, there's an additional storage space. I was just barely able to put a larger smartphone in there. This model has the optional full-color heads-up display. It's not quite as snazzy as some of the heads-up displays that we find in Mercedes models, but does give you things like turn-by-turn navigation directions, speed limit information, infotainment information, etc. Probably the most impressive screen in here is the one right behind the steering wheel. This is about 14 inches in terms of its diagonal dimension, and as you can see, it has a really crisp look to it. It will do a few different things. We have a night vision system, which unfortunately I can't show you because it's not nighttime. It works basically like everybody else's night vision system. We have a map display. Some of the transitions can be a little bit sluggish, I do have to say. We also have a traditional gauge layout that's highly customizable. You might be wondering, why do we have a forward camera view? This is for the augmented reality view that you can get in this system. Basically, it will overlay turn-by-turn navigation directions with some chevrons telling you where to turn. It'll show you which lane you're in, etc., giving you a little bit more information. And then, of course, there's the wow factor, because everybody else in the vehicle is going to be looking at this going, wow, that's an enormous, really crisp display. One thing that I was surprised by, however, is that it does not give us, for instance, turn signal view cameras if we turn on the turn signals. I would think that would be a really handy touch. And if you put the vehicle in reverse, we get the 360-degree camera system over here on this display rather than the one in the middle. It's worth noting that the front view camera on the instrument cluster is not the same camera that's used for the 360-degree camera system. This one is actually a little bit lower in the vehicle, so you can actually see where the front bumper is going. It's also a really eccentric wide-angle camera. Well, this image is being pulled from one of the active safety cameras above the windshield, so if I turn on the windshield wipers, you'll actually see the wipers go across the camera right there. The last touchscreen is over here on the left side of the instrument cluster. It'll give you things like your trip computer readouts. You can control what's going on there for that instrument cluster, the night vision camera, AR camera, map, gauge look, etc. And you can tweak heads-up display controls as well. If I put the vehicle in drive, you'll notice these little LEDs on the steering wheel start flashing. These are projecting infrared light at you. This is not visible to the human eye. And then there's a little camera right behind this area right here that's actually monitoring your face, making sure that you're paying attention. This enables the use of the Super Cruise system. If I turn the car on and then off again, you'll notice that you'll see the Super Cruise indicator light right here on the steering wheel, red there, and then blue, and then green. Those are basically the drive modes that you'll see when you're operating Super Cruise. Green means that it's operating, Blue means that it could be operating, and red means that you need to do something about the system's operation in a nutshell. Again, if you want to know more about Super Cruise, I have a separate video on that. This is a round 3-spoke design. Again, more of that real wood trim going on there. Over on this side, we have volume up-down controls, track forward, backward buttons, a scroll wheel to interact with the infotainment and navigation system. You can use the scroll wheel to change sources, or you can use it to scroll through playlists if your device supports it. On this side of the steering wheel, we have the controls for the adaptive cruise control system, heated steering wheel button right there. This button enables and disables the Super Cruise system. We then have a voice command button, and this button turns on the conversation enhancement system in the cabin. To the left of the steering wheel is where we find the controls for the air suspension. You can increase or decrease its ride height. We have a drive mode selector that allows us to toggle through tour, sport, off-road, tow haul mode. We then have controls for the 4-wheel drive system. There's an auto button if you want to do that, electric parking brake controller, optional trailer brake controller, and then a dimmer switch. Moving around to the door jamb, you can really see the attention to detail in this cabin. Not only do we have leather facing on the dashboard, we also have it all the way around the side as well. So the stitched leather continues all the way over there to the actual seal for the door. So this entire panel down here is stitched leather or stitched fabric all the way down there to the more rugged trim areas right there around the floor carpet. When it comes to acceleration, this generation Escalade is a little bit slower than the last model that I tested. This one ran 0 to 60 in 6 seconds even, putting this actually a little bit behind the base BMW X7 as I recall. At 121 feet, however, the stopping distance is absolutely excellent. This is nearly 200 pounds heavier than the previous generation Escalade, so that's the big reason that the 0 to 60 time is a little bit longer and the stopping distance is a little longer as well. And of course, if we're talking about the absolutely fully loaded version that I'm driving today, this has a lot of things on it that the previous generation Escalade didn't have. The massaging seats, all the stitched leather, everything that goes into this enormous and well-appointed cabin. In terms of handling, this is definitely an improvement over the previous generation Escalade, and you'll really notice that if you start pushing this harder out in your favorite winding mountain road, this definitely has a good solid feel to it. But the laws of physics must be obeyed. This is a fairly tall vehicle, it's fairly heavy, and it has 275 width tires on it. So comparing this to something like the upper end trims of the BMW X7 and Mercedes-Benz GLS somehow seems wrong. But keep in mind that price-wise, they're actually pretty close to the model that I'm driving here. If you were to compare this to base versions of the X7 or GLS, I think this compares extraordinarily well. And this certainly compares well against the Lincoln Navigator and any other full-size SUV in America. But for the price that you pay for absolutely fully loaded versions of this model, there are going to be better handling large SUVs, namely the BMW and the Mercedes. But that's absolutely excellent company to be in. And the fact that we can compare an Escalade to the ride quality, the handling ability, and the handling precision that we see in the German competition is really saying something about how far Cadillac has come. The first time I tested basically the same suspension setup in the Chevy Tahoe, which is the combination of airbags and magnetic reactive dampers, I was really impressed. In the Escalade, things are not quite as supple because of the tire size. These are really big wheels and really big tires, although they're not terribly wide at 275 width, as I said before. But the lower profile tires that we have in this vehicle definitely leave a few more road imperfections to come through into the cabin. You'll really notice the level of polish in the suspension if I get out on this road. This is a really poorly paved road surface. There's a lot of off-camber undulations, a lot of potholes, a lot of dips and dives, and this suspension is really handling them extremely well. Even though, again, you can feel more of these minor imperfections coming into the cabin than you could in other GM SUVs with the same suspension and higher profile tires, this has a really great feel to it. And the suspension, importantly, is not getting upset by it. So in these corners, in the previous generation Escalade, you could really feel the vehicle sort of skittering across the pavement if you were pushing it harder, and you don't feel that in this version. This feels an awful lot like, honestly, the unibody competition. Now let's talk about fuel economy. Over a day of mixed driving and 128 miles of driving, obviously not my usual driving cycle, I've been averaging 14.2 miles per gallon. Now, unfortunately, I haven't had the Escalade for too long, so I can't really tell you exactly what fuel economy would be like on a longer road journey. Hopefully, I will be able to have one of these back in for review soon, but I suspect that getting close to the EPA score is going to be possible if you're doing a lot of highway driving. Obviously, if you're doing a lot of in-city driving, fuel economy is going to drop down. This engine has GM's latest active cylinder deactivation system on it, so I suspect that fuel economy out on the highway is going to be pretty good. Unfortunately, I haven't had much time to test this, and I'm actually driving this back in order to give it back to Cadillac right now, so I won't really have the opportunity to take this on a longer highway road trip. However, I can say that out on a short highway journey when I was doing my Super Cruise testing, I averaged 22 miles per gallon, which was particularly impressive since this is the four-wheel drive model. Obviously, if you want the best fuel economy in your Escalade, you're going to want the model with the 3-liter turbo diesel engine. Keep in mind, diesel is going to be more expensive than gasoline, and you are going to have to feed it diesel exhaust fluid. But on the other hand, it's going to be about $900 to $1,000 a year less expensive to operate. Now it's time for the real test of Super Cruise. I'll take 2 number 10s, large with Diet Dr. Peppers. If you want to know more about Cadillac's Super Cruise system, I do have a complete video on that as well. But in this video, let's just give it a quick test. I'm out here and we're going to call this the spicy chicken test because I do love a spicy chicken burger. And what's the point of having a self-driving system like this if you can't do something ultimately American, which is drive-through and hands-off? Now keep in mind that I do have to keep my eyes on the road. That honestly makes this better, I guess, than doing this like you normally would in a car, where your eyes are certainly on your fries or on your burger more than they are on the road. Because if I take my eyes too far off the road for too long, then the system will tell me that I need to get control of the system. I'm going to go ahead and change lanes here. Nice touch with the Super Cruise system is now we have the auto lane change functionality. You don't have to hold down the turn signal stalk, you just tap it and it will keep blinking until it's able to complete the lane change. Now the last time I checked, the lane change functionality is not a feature of Tesla's autopilot system unless you have paid for the full self-driving update for theoretically future full self-driving at some later point in time. But as it exists now, this is the only system right now that will do this in this way, not in the beta phase, I guess you could say, because full self-driving from Tesla is technically still a beta. Look, Ma, no hands. Now it's worth noting that Super Cruise doesn't exactly drive like I would like it to drive. I would, in some of these instances, be a little bit more to the left or a little bit more to the right to avoid some of the potholes or rough sections of the road. And this is just going to plow right through them in the middle of the lane. The other thing worth noting is that this will not suggest lane changes or take exits for you like the full self-driving package from Tesla, of course, will. It also doesn't like to cut corners. So a driver would naturally cut corners here and there. This system is not going to do it. Sorry for the apparent product placement here. I will just put my finger in front of things. And there you have it. Super Cruise passes the spicy chicken sandwich test. Due to my limited time with the Escalade, I'm just going to go ahead and end this video here. I have to say, the Escalade really seems like the large SUV in America to beat. It has bigger proportions and a bigger cargo area and more legroom than we find really in any of the competition, including now the Lincoln Navigator, if we're talking about the longest version of the Escalade. Although the exterior of the Escalade seems a little bit plain in some areas compared to the Lincoln Navigator, I think the interior is quite simply a nicer place to spend your time. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below. Keep in mind, it looks like there is going to be a more powerful supercharged V8 engine available at some point in the Escalade, but let me know if you think the interior is worthy of the price tag in this generation, which can get up over 6 figures. Let me know. Be sure and find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautos. Check out the merch store over at AOAmerch.com, and I'll see all of you next week.